right, we're ready to start 12.3. Well, I shouldn't say good morning because I know homeschoolers do lessons at different times of the day. But for me, it's morning. So anyway, good morning, good afternoon, whatever it is. We're going to do 12.3 today. We're talking about graphs in this chapter. So if you'll look in your book, it's on page 232, section 12.3. And this lesson really is pretty easy. It's not really hard to follow a graph, to read a graph. Generally, they're pretty self-explanatory, but we're going to look into it a little bit more in depth today. So let's look up here at the top, and I'm just going to kind of read through and stop ever so often and offer some explanation if I can. You ever tried looking through the pages of numbers? They're not easy to quickly take in. Even the frequency tables we looked at in 12.1 take a moment to process, and they don't always help us see what conclusions we can take away from the data. Seeing a picture or a diagram can often help us grasp a concept no amount of words could get across. And we know that's true because sometimes we look at something, we read something or we hear somebody say something, you're like, oh, what? Then you see a picture of it or you see a diagram of it, you're like, ooh, I got it now. For this reason, graphs are an important part of statistics. Graphs pictorially represent the data collected so it can be grasped at a glance. They help us present data in an understandable way. In this lesson, we're going to look at two different types of graphs, the pie graph and the bar graph. You're probably already familiar with these graphs as they are often in newspapers and magazines. Hopefully our exploration, though, will give you a better, greater understanding of the graphs that you encounter in everyday life and a little better picture of what graph does what. Alright, so first, pie graphs. So in a pie graph, a circle is used to represent the total 100%. And each shaded section represents the percent of that total of a specific number that it constitutes in that. Pie graphs are great for showing how individual numbers relate to a whole. So back in section 12.1, we collected data regarding the ages attending a sewing class. Notice how we could graph the relative frequencies of each age on a pie graph, thus visually showing the age composition in the class. So there's our frequency distribution chart that we had back over in section 12.1. The ages, the frequency at which those ages happen, and then we turn that into a relative frequency. And remember, the number that we use on the bottom of the fraction to turn it into a percent is the total number in the class, which was 20. So now look at the top of 233. There's your pie graph. There's your age of students in the sewing class. Now, our book is black and white, so you can't really tell, but that's, well, I guess not particularly, doesn't have to be in a particular color order, but it is easier when it's, what do you call those colors? Primary colors. It's easier to see. But nonetheless, with black and white, they've used different shades of black and gray. So in the pie graph, the entire circle represents 100%. Now 60% of the circle is shaded to represent the portion of 12-year-olds, 25% to represent the 13-year-olds, and the 5% sections to represent the 8-year-olds, the 14-year-olds, and the 16-year-olds. Notice how the pie graph makes it easy to take in at a glance what portion of the whole each number represents. It's easy to instantly see what ages make up the majority of the class. Now, I was able to figure that out by looking at just the frequency distribution chart, but some people need a visual, and a pie graph is a great visual. I didn't need that one on there. Generally, I do need a visual, but I didn't need it on there. But you might have had it. Might make it easier for you to tell the frequency of those numbers. If you can hear that sound in my volume, that scratchy sound, I apologize. I've got to get some new equipment for my computer. All right, let's look at the bar graphs and the column graphs. So bar graphs are sometimes called column graphs. I've never heard them called that before, but nonetheless, if the bars are vertical, this up and down. Another useful way of displaying data. In a bar graph or column graph, bars, surprise, are used to graphically show the data. Unlike pie graphs, bar graphs don't show how data relates to the whole. Instead, they show pictorially how data compares to other data. For example, suppose we had data on how many people 3 different county parks serve each month. So you've got Park A, Park B, and Park C down at the bottom of 233 in that box. So there's the numbers of people that each of those parks serve. Now here, we're not interested in a percent of the whole. That is a relative frequency. We're just interested in comparing totals between the parks. We can do that easily on a bar or column graph. Notice that the basic concept of the graph is the same either direction. So let's turn the page, and there you go. There's your bar graphs, column graphs, whatever you want to call them. Top of page 234. Okay, you see how I just want you to look at those for a second. See how the bars go up and down on one, and then horizontally on the other. So in the park scenario, we're dealing with parks. So we only have one numerical value, the number of people that each park served. Sometimes we'll be working with 2 numerical values, and sometimes the data will be grouped together into ranges. Now, bar graphs with grouped data are called histograms. The histogram shown here displays data regarding the number of houses sold within a specific price range. Notice that the columns shown are right next to each other on a histogram. There's no gap. That's to show that there's no gap in the ranges. Each range picks up right where the previous one leaves off. Now, you need to see the graph in order to understand that. So this is the graph at the bottom of page 234. Number of houses sold by price range. Okay, now I want you to look. There's no gap between the columns. You see that? The columns go up and down. They go this way, vertically. And there's no gap between them. They butt right up to one another like this. There's no gaps between them. A lot of times, second, third, fourth graders or whatever it is, young people, make a graph, and then they got these separate little bars that come out. Well, on a histogram, they're right beside one another. Now, there's also no gap in the ranges. Now, I don't know if you remember, but I think we studied this early on this year. The range of numbers is from this number to this number and all the numbers in between. A range of numbers. All right, look at the bottom of that histogram. So it starts at 100,000. The first section, the range is 100,000 to 149,999. Okay, the second range picks up at 150,000 to 199,999. The next range picks up at the next number, and so on. So there's no gaps in the ranges either. So you have to guess, well, was there any in this area? No, they're all together. Notice that. Okay. So on page 235, there's quite an interesting piece of information. Dr. Brian Ray, this is an actual for real graph, but notice that these are not like a histogram. I told you the bars that go up, they butt up against each other like this one. These don't. These are separate. I think this is what they actually call a bar graph, or a column graph, because just like the ones at the very top of 234, see those have gaps in between them. The histogram does not. Just keep that in mind. I don't know why, but I'm just letting you know that the histogram does not have spaces between its bars. I'm guessing because it uses ranges of numbers, and they flow together. I'm guessing that's why. All right, so on page 235, I'm going to let you read through that. Now, I think there's a couple of questions on your worksheet that you'll have to come back and look at this. But it's real interesting. It's about homeschoolers and things like that. And I want you to go back and look at that graph later. Let's turn the page over to 236 to the keeping perspective. So in general, pie and bar or column graphs are most useful with smaller groups of data. Once we get more than 6 or so bars or portions to our pie, they get harder to take in at a glance. There are other types of charts for more complex data. Yet while there are many other types of graphs and many variations in the ones we looked at, the point is that data can be displayed graphically in order to make it easier to quickly assimilate. Because graphs help summarize data, you'll encounter graphs a lot throughout your life in magazines, papers, online research, etc. It's important to understand them so you'll be able to see what's being communicated and interpret those graphs correctly. Now, if you'll look at your worksheet right quick, 12.3, it's front and back. Now, I'm not going to grade this page. It should be super easy. I've kind of looked over it a little bit. You just have to read the graphs. Now, if you don't do well on this, because some people can't read graphs well, they don't make sense to them, and that's okay. But I want to see how you do on this without having to grade it. I'm not going to put that pressure on you. And then, of course, do the back. You've got some skill sharpening and stuff back there. But the number 4 at the top on the back page where it says use the Dr. Brian Ray box, that's that gray box about the homeschooling thing that I was telling you about. You'll use that to answer those questions, okay? All right, now you let me know if you have any trouble with this page, okay? Otherwise, that's it.